So Chris, welcome back to the Leaders of Tomorrow podcast. So excited to have you.
Second time, I'm surprised.
I know.
I didn't mess up the first time around. It's good.
You top rated podcast, Chris.
Much better than my brother Neil Johnson, right?
Much better. Neil Johnson. Yeah.
It's always nice to know that the sibling rivalry is still so lopsided. It brings me a great amount of joy.
We'll be bringing Neil back, and then there'll be a big people get to decide again who they like better. So and I know it's always about that.
This time they're going to show his face though, right? So it's because we're only half brothers. So
Yes.
he's.
So I try to stay on Neil's good side too. So Chris is a former lots and lots of achievements, former McKinsey partner, VP of strategy of HBC, recently a founding managing partner of Venn Growth. That's where we're going to spend most of our time this podcast. Super excited to learn more. We were chatting before the podcast, but why don't we get started with, before your time at StudentWorks, who was Chris Reynolds?
Oh, before my time at StudentWorks, wow. A lot less disciplined and focused, I'll tell you that much.
Yeah.
It was, that's one of the amazing things about the opportunity with StudentWorks, right? Is all of a sudden you're kind of thrown into this role where it's like, it really stops and starts with you.
Right.
Right. So like any previous job I had before that, even though those were great jobs, I had great mentors there. I'd spent some summers in investment banking working there, and great people, but you come in, you grind for sure.
Right.
But small part of kind of what feeds into a much bigger picture.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden you're like, okay, well, now I got to go sell paint jobs.
Right.
Never touched a paintbrush in my life.
Yeah.
And I got to go convince people that I'm trustworthy enough, and the brand helps a ton, right? But you've got to sell people individually too, and convince them that, you're the right person, do the work on their most prized asset.
Yes.
And having that level of personal accountability and personal responsibility was amazing, transformative for me in my career, for sure. And something the country, as you and I've talked about a lot, something the country needs a lot more of is people exposed to entrepreneurship a lot earlier.
Yeah.
Because you begin to understand how hard it is to make money.
Yes.
So many moments in StudentWorks, right, where things really hit you, and you're the person. You've got great mentors, like you were unbelievable and helped me through many of those moments, like damaging people's property accidentally.
Right.
It was my painters, not me.
No. But actually, why don't you speak to that? Just because that, and it's, I know Tina Pan, an associate of yours from McKinsey, she was on earlier today, and she spoke about some of those really challenging times, and they still brand you, but in a good way. There's really no scars, but it really shows who you are and how you're going to show up under really major, intense pressure for an 18, 19, 20, 21-year-old.
There's a couple of ones that really come to mind, right? So the first one is, and I think I've told this story.
Yes, at our trainings, Chris has been awesome to come to trainings.
And it's wild, right? Because I remember it's like, okay, so the clock starts, you're done your training, you learn how to sell, and then everybody starts going. And then every week you're getting these updates, like here's who sold the most. Yeah. And then you're like, whoa, there's a scorecard here. Yeah. And you are accountable directly for your own progress, and the input of your effort, for the most part, leads to the outcomes, right? And that's like lesson number one for anyone should be like, the personal responsibility and the agency that you need to be able to show at a really high level to deliver successful outcomes is very, very difficult, right?
Yes.
So I remember that moment where it's like just snowstorming in London, Ontario, and you're out there and you're like, just like the team can't drive and all the rest. So I remember just being like, we've got to go cold call and prospect. So I was getting black cabs to drive people and pick them up and corralling people. And I think we got 100 leads off of, prospecting the snow because everyone's home.
Yes,
so
exactly.
It's like this moment where you have the choice to be, say to yourself, it's snowing, tough. Who's going to go do this? No one wants to hear from you. And you're like, no, you know what? You're just going to go force it and do the work and do it in the tough times. And when people, aren't working and then seeing the impact of that, I think that's how I booked my first $20,000 worth of work. Was, off of those rounds of prospecting in times when people might otherwise not be doing it, right? Because it was not fun or comfortable or whatever, but you wind up paying people more for the leads they generated in that time to get them out and incentivized. And it paid back in multiple times from there. Yeah. So I think that was like one of my first memories of just being like, wow, it
makes a huge difference. And in fact, with inflation, it's more like $40,000 is what the sales would have. And it is interesting because that's actually something that we coach our leaders on. the big rainstorm, the big snowstorm, every thing in your body is going to say, oh, I shouldn't go. And it's in fact the best time to go. And there's so many times in where that's in our life, where there's something that is so challenging and we think, well, then we should back down. No, we should go forward. And it's that resilience that we learn. It's actually that anti-fragility that makes us more and more powerful.
I think that's exactly it. The word we use a lot is grit.
Grit, yes.
And it's this combination of, passion and perseverance that comes together. And honestly, that's something like, if you think of my life now as an investor, that's what you really love to see in the founders you back, right? Because we're investing minority checks into high growth companies. Mm-hmm. And really, it was so funny. We were chatting with one of our investors the other day who sits on the board of a couple of, venture funds, private equity funds. And he's like, after pattern recognition of, 60 plus deals, I can tell you that there's a perfect correlation between the quality of the entrepreneur and the financial outcome that the fund gets.
Yes.
And, in many ways, when you're in our world, there's just so many obstacles get thrown to these entrepreneurs, just like the student works entrepreneurs. Yeah. And your ability to demonstrate grit and persevere with passion and keep doing the hard work. It's what makes or breaks the deals that we do.
That you do. Yeah. Angela Duckworth, Grit. She wrote the book. And it's a book we talk about a lot at Student Works. And I just love it. Right. And I can tell you have a lot of grit.
Thanks, Chris. I try. I've got passion and perseverance, at least, for sure.
So post Student Works, what was next, after Student Works and sort of your career path? Because I know a lot of times our leaders like to go, how do I get into, how could I be Chris? How could I get into venture capital? And I know there's never a direct route like that. And that's one of the reasons why I love walking through it, because you did not have a normal route to starting a venture capital fund.
I wasn't focused enough. Student Works was great for me, but I think back to, and I developed a lot there, but I probably, if I should have done something, it's probably come back for a second summer.
Yeah.
And I opted not to do that. And I think there was some interesting things I did, but I genuinely think I just took a bit of an easier path, which was the wrong move.
Yeah.
I was having so much fun. I'm a pretty social guy. You might have experienced that with me before, once or twice. And I just wanted new experiences and try new things and the rest of it. But there were some harder paths I needed to take, and I just genuinely wasn't focused enough. I had some other great jobs after Student Works, internships and the rest of it. But, what I realized, I came to the end of my journey at Western. Mm-hmm. I was running my own event marketing business, while we were there, but that was, event marketing is a very kind term for what we did, which was, help college kids party, which is a noble cause.
Very good at it.
I'm not terrible at that. I've lost that edge in that vein, being a dad with my son here. But it's I needed to I kind of got to the end of the road at Western. I was like, well, what am I going to do? And I always had a lot of ambition and aspiration, but I hadn't fully built that grit muscle yet.
Right.
And so I kind of had a choice, right? At that point, I was like not getting the jobs that I wanted and was interested in. And I realized, okay, well, I took my school seriously in that, I did well on a liberal arts degree, and a liberal arts degree is honestly, I think, one of the best training grounds you can have actually for a career later in life, and your ability to write and reason and think. And it's really valuable, but it's a little less practical in the Canadian context, right? Coming right out of school. And
I got the same.
Yeah. Right. Like the jobs are available to the Ivy kids.
Yes.
I think, was Tina an Ivy kid? She might've been very smart.
She, Waterloo, I believe.
Yeah. Waterloo. That's right. That's right. Probably even more practical. But the jobs weren't available. So I went actually back to school. I went to Sauder, did a 1-year master's in management. Mm-hmm. That wasn't quite enough. Right. Realized that I needed to take a harder path. So I took a job at KPMG. Right. I got lucky enough to be recruited by this wonderful guy, Elio Luongo, who's been a wonderful mentor to me. he became the CEO of KPMG Canada later.
Wow.
And saw something in me, which I'm very thankful for. I'm still not sure what, but he gave me that opportunity, and because I kept getting this feedback, like, you seem like a nice guy. Very nice of them people to say, but you don't really have a quantitative CV, and you clearly want to be in business and something finance related. And I just looked at this. I'm like, man, I guess I'm going to have to do something hardcore and go and get my chartered accountant's designation and the rest of it. And that was probably the first moment where I'm like, okay, I'm going, full head first into something that I'm not necessarily confident that I can do, because when I was doing the Biz 257 pre-Ivy course at Western, I did terrible on the accounting courses. I was getting like 50s and 60s. They're like showing me T accounts. I'm like, what is a T account? This is terrible. Like, this is so mind numbing. And I remember even actually when I was in that moment at the end of my time at Western, I was sitting in my apartment with Jay Hamilton, another was the HBA president at the time, and he had all his Ivy friends over, and these brilliant women were in the room talking about going to KPMG and EY and Deloitte. And I was just, in my 5th year of political science. And I just said to them, I'm like, I have no idea how you guys are going to do that. That sounds like the absolute worst thing in the world.
Right.
Fast forward 15 months, I was interning at KPMG.
Right.
About to start my chartered accountant's designation. And I went back to school for a second year after my master's to get all my accounting prereqs, and then did that. And then because I didn't want enough, I hadn't had quite enough change going from poli-sci into a chartered accountant's designation, I threw on top of a move to China for 5 months before I started at KPMG full time.
Right.
So I went full bore into perseverance and building. And, that was kind of the first steps I took after.
Yeah, and a couple of things to point out. One of the things that we've done way better, and I think if had you joined the company now, you would have stayed longer, because we're way better at returning people and painting a picture of why it's important. And the other thing as well is that there's just one of the great things in life is when we can figure out what we want, and you'd figured out what you want, and then there's just stuff you need to do to get that. And so stuff you needed to do was get really trained in finance. Yeah. Become an accountant. Like, I need that if I want this. And so maybe that's not what, that numbs my brain, but I actually can persevere, and I can figure that out. And of course, I'm sure you're not the best accountant or the best finance person out there, and you're using your other skills to really dominate the area the way you are, but it's going to take sacrifice, getting what you want in this world.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. Actually, one of our founder CEOs, this guy, Victor Tam, he's an amazing entrepreneur, like one of the most insane talents. And so is his founding team. Yeah. He's got his other founder, Dan Chin, COO, and Hubert Chan, who's the chief creative officer. These guys are just wild talents. Yeah. Like, I'm very lucky to get to work around them. He sent, we're always sharing things with each other, right? Whether it's, practical things around the business, things that inspire us, things that help us learn. It's just such a big part of what we do.
Awesome.
And you just sent this thing the other day, and I really needed it on Instagram. I was talking about just, it's around this theme of grit, right? Yeah. Where it's like, when you go and do the really hard thing, you're going to feel like you're maybe not only stagnating, but you're maybe kind of like going in the wrong direction. Yeah. Until you actually build the requisite skills and experience to get back up.
Yes.
And it's, I think one of those important lessons to learn that some people can pick a very linear career, but if you're an entrepreneur, your career is not likely to be linear.
Yes.
And this was another thing I chatted with another one of my mentors about, another fantastic mentor. And we were talking about, what it took to start our firm, right? And we've raised a decent amount of capital, I think, particularly for, a first time, private equity group. Yeah. But the path is not like it would have been at a McKinsey partner, right? Where you're starting salary at X and it's, growing 25 to 35% a year,
every
maybe
year.
oscillating a little bit based on performance.
Yeah.
But it's a pretty straightforward path, and it's
exactly a very huge winning path.
It's a huge winning path,
and a guaranteed winning. And of course, life is not 100% guaranteed, but I just need to show up, and work hard, and
that's just it. And by the way, the New York Times can say whatever they want about McKinsey and Company. I think it's one of the most amazing institutions on the planet.
So do I.
And it's an amazing training ground for people who are in their career. And genuinely, they help come up with really creative solutions to a number of really tough problems for business leaders globally. And I loved my time there, and I could have stayed on. It's one of those places, probably the only place I could have existed for a long period of time outside of being an entrepreneur. But it's a more linear path, and the path that we're on is not linear. But honestly, that's, I think, part of the exciting part about it is just the ability to control your own destiny. Right. Yeah. And, now we have that same scorecard, for better or for worse. And some days you feel great and some days you don't, about the performance of the companies you invest in. We've been lucky to have great partners and great investments. But there's something amazing about that scorecard. Yeah. That if you like that, from your early time at StudentWorks, it's a great marker of whether or not I think you're going to love entrepreneurship.
Yeah. And I remember meeting you on Bloor Street for lunch one time when you were at McKinsey, and you were describing the hours that you were working. And I think our leaders need to listen to just what the hours were and you were just so on fire. And and I can't remember how long it took to sort of arrange to meet you for lunch, but do you remember the hours that you used to?
Yeah, and I don't want to give a negative PSA for McKinsey because I had a weird approach to it, right? But it was mostly driven by my own lack of progress early in my career, right?
So you were driving it.
Yeah, yes. I was driving. I was driving really hard, and McKinsey, if you like the vertical you're in, like I really just love consumer retail, and I worked with a bunch of amazing people. So it was just like, it's a constant pie eating contest where you love pie and first prize is more pie. And so to me, it was actually great. And my son wasn't born yet.
Yes.
And so you just kind of do what you needed to do. And again, I was making up for lost time because I went from KPMG. I was lucky enough to get an offer at McKinsey. I eked in. They gave me a special third final round interview because I think they saw something, thankfully.
Right.
And I think I paid that back nicely over the course of, the 6 or so years that I was there. But yeah, to start, it was pretty much wake up at 7 a.m., laptops in your bed, and you just grind all the way until, 2 and change in the morning, 3. You sleep 4 or 5 hours, so you get up, you do it all over again. And, that was not what everyone's path was.
Right.
But I was just so self-conscious coming in, kind of being this guy who had maybe not exactly had the first couple of years of my career go exactly the way I wanted to do. And then all of a sudden I was in accounting, which, by the way, my experience at KPMG was unbelievable and I learned so much. And it was, again, another place where there was a great training ground, really seminal in my career. Accounting and audit in particular, not for me. And, those firms do a lot more than audit, but I just needed to keep going and grinding. And so it was the early part of my career at McKinsey. I showed up. I remember orientation week, back then it was called BCR, Basic Consultant Readiness. And you're in a room of like 30 people at the time, and the numbers are way bigger now, but you're in a room of 30 people and then you get split into these like 6 groups of 5. And the guy next to me had a PhD in physics from MIT. Yeah. And I'm just like, shit. This guy, and looking at his handwriting, and it was so perfect.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm the liberal arts kid. All the other kids from Western here are Ivy kids.
Yeah.
I had to kind of do my end around on a chartered accountant's designation, another degree, and I'm like 28 years old.
Right.
They made me come in as a business analyst because at that time they kind of didn't do experience hires super well. So I was a 28-year-old business analyst at McKinsey trying to figure it out, sitting next to a PhD in physics from MIT who, was not at the business analyst level, and trying to figure out and then, you have the whole thing, McKinsey and the reputation is daunting. You're like, how did I get here? You have imposter syndrome going.
Imposter syndrome, yes.
And yeah, the only way to ensure that you don't fall victim to imposter syndrome is I just made up my mind at that time that there was no way I was going down. It was not going to go down and out any other way than anybody saying I literally outworked everybody.
Yeah.
And, I'm probably not everybody, but,
no.
I was trying to manage
no
my
one was
life.
going to work harder.
Yeah, that's
yes.
exactly it.
Yeah.
I left it all on the field for sure. And there's certain days you really ground it out, but it was amazing because for me, what I really took out of it at that point, I had so many amazing mentors. And one of my mentors from McKinsey is actually now a founding partner of my investment firm. And he used to run the retail practice, McKinsey globally, for a number of years. And, I just remember being like, this is amazing. And you're so tired, but you're learning so much at the same time, and everyone's got all this great experience, and you have these fascinating clients, and you're kind of going through that whole process. So for me, it was actually super energizing. It was like a really energizing time in my career.
It's so vibrant, such amazing projects, such amazing people doing really groundbreaking work. And so perhaps, and I know McKinsey can't talk about customers, but maybe you could talk about areas or to give our leaders some idea of maybe a project that you worked on that would be anonymous enough so that they could understand and see some of the groundbreaking work.
Yeah,
you
I'd
did.
be careful there. Don't want to get in.
And of course, total respect to McKinsey. So
I think it's what was interesting about a lot of the things we're doing was they were really highly innovative, right? So they're kind of on the cutting edge of different things. And there was a lot of work we did with technology in stores, which I found to be really, really energizing. And yeah, I think what's the most interesting about it is you're just kind of solving the toughest problems because, the fees are not zero.
Yes.
For a McKinsey and Company. So you're solving tough problems that people view as being able to get a requisite return on solving that tough problem relative to the fees. So That's what I found to be just most energizing about it. And I think, it was that moment for me where like, you just got to go all in to prove to yourself that you actually have the grit to be as successful as you might otherwise want to be. And it's an amazing environment for that. And, on the client side, I think actually what's most amazing is all these unbelievable people I got to meet from really diverse backgrounds.
Yeah.
And, not everybody wants you there, but there's, a lot of people that are really excited about your support. And, people not wanting you there is, similar to what you're going to face in a client situation when, maybe you've messed up some form of painting when you're at Student Works or whatever. So it's just another great lesson, right?
Yes.
So all these things continue to compound.
Yeah. And so, when did the idea of starting a growth fund, a venture fund start, and how did that coalesce with your co-founder?
Yeah. So I'd spent a little bit of time at OMERS and their direct private equity group with one of my partners, John McCarthy, who's a really talented investor. And so we had worked together. We had done a large deal for OMERS in the dermatology space, a multi-site derm business out of the US. And I really enjoyed that experience. I wasn't quite done at McKinsey, so I went back again and spent some more time there. And then, I was looking around and kind of considering what I wanted out of my career. And I just felt I'd gone through this great stretch. What was KPMG doing my CA? I'd done a deal as an investor. I'd worked all these years at McKinsey and really built a great network of people and what I thought was a really nice, varied skill set. And it was a great experience. And I was itching for, I always had this view when I got into things, once it was getting into KPMG and then McKinsey and the rest of it, I'm like, I don't want to be impatient now. And I was somebody that just took me a little bit of time to figure out exactly what I wanted to do. And it's actually why McKinsey was a great option because you didn't have to choose. You could go do what's called a random walk for your first couple of years and different industries, different client types, the rest of it. But I just had this kind of vision for the things and experiences I wanted to have.
Right.
So for me, it was like, okay, get a quantitative designation, step one. Step two, work at one of the best firms in the world, which is McKinsey. And that was the next one, get some. And then the other two types of experience I thought about, one was, investment experience, which I got for my time at OMERS. And then when I was sitting there, I was like, okay, well, I was just right in that year where I was up for election the first time. I think my prospects were quite good from everything I had heard. And I was an associate partner, so I've been kind of playing this partner role as an engagement director for the previous, 18 to 24 months. And I was sitting there, I was like, wow, this is getting paid a lot of money. Yeah. And, we grew up, my dad was in public sector. So it just wasn't a house where there was a lot of money kicking around. And, I remember some of those early bonus checks. My mom was like, this is insane. What you're getting, this is really good. And, for me, it was as well. But I just kind of felt, I'm like, I don't necessarily know that I had this moment where I was at McKinsey and it was 2 a.m. and I was in a hotel room in Chicago drinking a scotch and fuming about something, and I was just like, wow, my ownership mindsets will never be perfectly aligned to my compensation.
Right.
And my potential outcomes. And I'm like, even if you just take compensation, kick it to the side, because I genuinely really don't care about that much. I'm like, I need to solve for more control. Over what I'm going to do. So I sat there kind of that year and I was like, if I start getting paid what I think I'm going to get paid next year, I'm like, that's going to be very hard to walk away from.
Very hard to ever leave.
And very hard to ever leave. So I'm like, I might as well just dive. I'm like, now I'm already in this cycle of, disruption and building what I want to build. So I'm like, I might as well do it again. So I just had this question to myself. I'm like, do you want to start something or you've never experienced actually being on the corporate side and seeing it from your client side? So I decided to go and take a role in house. I'm such a passionate, I have such a passion for Canadian brands, and Canadian consumer retail brands, and Hudson's Bay Company is such an amazing legacy brand that was obviously, has faced its share of troubles. So I found that opportunity idea really exciting. And, everyone was like, you're crazy. You're away from this, like a huge haircut to go do it. But I just was more about investing in the experience and investing in my journey. Because I felt like at some point I was going to get back to that point of entrepreneurship. And this is the longest possible answer to your question of how do you decide to start your investment firm? But that was really it. I kind of took this role at Hudson's Bay and then I was like, got in there and I kind of saw what I felt like the appropriate runway was. And, I signed up for something. What I wound up in was a little bit different, mostly driven by the fact the business got taken private. It was a public company when I joined, and the take private, necessitated different decisions. And to no fault of the owners, they were doing the right thing for them, for their investment. And then, the window opened up and my partner, John, was considering new things. And I had my friend and my partner, Cam Pollard out West, and he was considering, some new options. We kind of all came together and decided, we just looked at the Canadian landscape and said, if we're going to, invest and buy companies or invest in companies, how do we want to do this? And we just saw the biggest gap was in growth equity in Canada. And we saw the advent of a group called the Canada Business Growth Fund, where half the money came from the federal government, half the money came from the charter banks. And that was the third government solution beyond Business Development Bank of Canada, Export Dev Canada. And you're just like, it's kind of a wild gap, right? And then we saw there's so many mid-market buyout funds in Canada. Some of them are amazing. But we kind of wanted to fill a gap in the market. And that's what we endeavored to do. And that was the genesis of starting our firm. And for me, I saw the consumer retail angle, which is, I was going to invest in businesses that I knew the business model in, because you see so many investment firms. And I think the world was a lot easier, back in the 80s, 90s, 2000s. Debt was cheap. You could sack a bunch of debt on an equity check, buy a company by virtue of the fact of the financial structuring of it. You were going to make a lot of money, and it was an easier time to do private equity back then. And I think now it's a little bit tougher. There's so much money that's filled into the asset class, and businesses are really hard to build, and debt's not as cheap as it used to be. So for us, it was, let's go focus on areas where we know we can have personal impact on the outcomes.
Right.
Doesn't mean we're always going to be right, but we can have personal impact on the outcomes. And our investors will trust that no matter what, we're going to roll up our sleeves and we're going to get shit done.
Right.
And we're going to help drive impact and drive outcomes. So that was the idea. And you just kind of look at this amazing ecosystem we have in Canada. I'm very inspired by a lot of the entrepreneurs. Chip Wilson, I find to be an unbelievably inspiring individual.
And for our leaders, that's the CEO and founder of Lululemon.
That's exactly it. Yeah, he's since stepped aside.
Yes,
but
of course. He was.
He's an insane talent. I love what Chip has built. And his book, actually, for anyone that hasn't read it, is an unbelievable manual for aspiring founders or current founders, because it talks about the good and the bad of private equity, I think, in pretty great detail.
Yes.
And so you look at people like Chip, or you look at Aritzia, Arc'teryx, Canada Goose, the Lululemons of the world. These are companies that are homegrown here, and they all went to the US for major capital.
Yeah.
And I just found that to be really wild, because even in like a quasi remote work environment like the one we're in today, it's, where I think your private equity partners can and should be most helpful. And I genuinely think if people are considering investment in their company, they should really stress test the people they're talking to understand how helpful they would be and what help looks like. Yeah. Because there's a whole host of forms that can take, and some are good and some are not, and some are neutral. Albeit I think we've got a lot of great investors in the Canadian space, and a lot of great investment firms out there. Particularly in the middle market, firms like Birch Hill Private Equity, where one of my good friends from Western, Pat Duncan, works. There's great firms like them that are out there. But I think, you want your investors to be helpful, and where I think we help the most, team and talent. So even in this remote work environment, it's still, talent is local, particularly products, services, all of it. And, your channels are local. If you're a four-wall service-based business, or a four-wall product-based business, like you're selling in Canada to start.
Right.
And even if you're direct to consumer, like our brand Monos is, your first stores are going to be local. You want them around the mind and matter of the company, so they can be managed and you can get the learnings from them and the rest of it. So there's all these seminal decisions you're going to make that are related to the country that you're actually headquartered.
Right.
And, if you've got an American firm, they can be amazing partners. And a lot of times, they'll be great on the traditional private equity things about, capital raising, capital planning allocation, running the financial side of your business. And by the way, the really good investors that you meet, they do a lot more than that.
Of course.
But our view was, and we love partnering with groups out of the US, our group, our kind of focus was, let's actually invest and lean into these local heroes that you're going to be becoming global brands, and help them on the things that we are very well placed to do. Yeah. Because when it comes to owned retail is a great example, right? We know the street corners, we know the landlords, we know the brokers. Yeah. We really understand the markets well. So, you might have a US investor, if you kind of took their lead and they're like, okay, you're going to open up a store in Vancouver. And they're going to just, they're like, where?
Where? Exactly.
And whereas, we have a strong point of view, and we spar. We have amazing partners on the real estate side. We work exclusively with CBRE, who's tremendous. And, but we spar on those items together. Yeah. And at least I just think better outcomes between our management teams, us, and the rest of it. So yeah, a long way of saying, we just felt passionate. One, we have a pre-existing passion for Canadian brands. Yeah. Two, what's happening in Canada right now is an absolute joke from a productivity perspective and the lack of entrepreneurship in the country. Yeah. And I think we've forgotten that, we need to actually create net new jobs in the private sector.
Not just in the public sector.
Yeah.
Yes.
It turns out the tax revenue math on that works a little bit less well than jobs created in the private sector.
Exactly. Yeah.
Even if the politicians have forgotten it. So, we just kind of look at all these things. We're like, man, we're really passionate about doing this, passionate about building this. Compensation, obviously, we need to deliver great returns for the people that give us capital. We will do that. But, there's a passion element to this of supporting Canadian entrepreneurship and building Canadian brands, which is really important for why we do what we do.
Yeah, it's so great. And so when you raised your first funds, you had an idea already that you would be focused on retail Canadian brands. Was that the strategy?
We have some of our partners who do healthcare and education work, which is great, and they invest North America wide.
Okay.
When it came to the consumer retail arm, we actually did not have that idea at the start.
Oh, okay.
We actually want to, but then it really clicked when we saw our investment in Monos.
Okay.
And when we met with Victor, our founder CEO of Monos, and he was like, we looked at the options he had, and they were so narrow. Right. They're just like, we're not a lot of great capital options for him.
Okay.
I think it's kind of like us and BDC. And by the way, BDC is an amazing partner and they fill a really critical role in the ecosystem, but it's our view is they should have ideally partners like us in their investments with deep domain expertise that can help grow and scale these businesses. I think particularly just speaking on the consumer retail side.
Right.
And we saw the lack of options available to people like Victor. We then triangulated with all these stories and, we spent time with folks like Chip Wilson from Lulu. And, we just started looking at this. We're like, this is insane that no one's investing in this ecosystem. And then, watching the Trudeau government for the last, I want to forget how many years, and feeling like the country was just veering on the wrong course.
Right.
I think we just made the decision to try and lean in to be something homegrown. And there's a number of great other entrepreneurs that have done that. But the tech space is a great one where you see amazing homegrown brands like Shopify, who all of our businesses rely on to, for their partnership. I think we just wanted to be part of a solution here that was homegrown. And, the passion, when you talk about grit, the combination of passion and perseverance, it's got to be more about like, oh, I just want to deliver great returns. You want to do that. But for me, I've always been driven by this, needed to feel that great sense of passion. And growing up in a household where, my dad spent a lot of his life as an elected official in Canada, I've had some great experiences through that. And I've always just been extraordinarily passionate Canadian. And that's a big part about what drove that decision for us to focus on the market here. That and nobody else is doing it the same way. There's some partners are doing it in select ways in different pockets, but we are the only group which is purely dedicated from a growth capital perspective, growth equity perspective, to high growth, non-tech based Canadian consumer retail.
That's neat. Why don't we dig into Monos? I think good chance some of our leaders might have heard it, but share about the brand and what it is and what the concept is, and an incredible number so far.
Yeah. I mean, it's an amazing business that we met when the guys were, doing just kind of around 7 figures of revenue. It was kind of a break-even business, and we've since grown that to 9 figures of revenue and a really healthy, robust profit margin. And really, I would say, you always kind of start looking at the market to make sure you understand the dynamics. And it was one that if you look at first blush, you can say, wow, this is really competitive. Is this a good idea?
Right.
Like, does the world need another luggage brand?
Yeah.
But then when you actually really get into the competitive dynamics in the market, what was interesting about what the guys had figured out is that really, the market dynamics and structure and the way it was working was there was a lot of brands that were selling for cheap product. So you think of some you'd buy in the basement of Hudson's Bay on Bay days for 40 off, part of the problem. And then, you go jump up to the premium end of the market and you're spending, I remember as a McKinsey consultant looking for a great suitcase and you're like, I have to spend $1,000 on Tumi. Like this is kind of just like black, standard. It's got nice exterior material, but I'm not particularly drawn to the brand. And then you jump up to Rimowa, which is LVMH owned. And, that just never resonated with me from a values perspective. Yes. The concept of spending $1,600+ on a piece of luggage, that was, probably what my father's biweekly paycheck was at some point growing up.
Right. Yeah.
So that never resonated with me. And I kind of find that type of consumerism, I'm quite allergic to it.
Right.
So what we liked about it was we saw this gap in the premium segment of the market. And actually, when we saw it, it was because Nordstrom was the first wholesale partner for Monos.
Right.
And they wanted Monos quite badly. And we kind of saw markers of that and we had conversations with them. And then you start looking at the premium segment of the market and you're like, there's this younger customer which cares a lot about aesthetic. There's a movement towards the fashionization of the category,
right,
which is really driven a lot by social media and people, sharing
traveling. Yes.
Exactly.
Pictures. Okay.
So you don't want this great travel experience with all your friends in a ratty suitcase sitting, when you're
Yes.
when you're doing your social at the airport. So you just saw more of this trend towards the fashionization of the category and the premiumization of the category too.
Right.
So you don't want to spend $1,000 on Toomey to, look like a McKinsey consultant.
Yeah.
You don't want to spend $1,600 on Rimowa because you can't afford it.
Right.
And it's frankly a ripoff. And then you also don't want to spend $100 on a piece of luggage that doesn't look very good. So we really saw, and this is why one of the reasons I actually like Away as a brand, they were kind of the first brand that really shot out there and built up an incredible following very quickly.
Right.
And I think Away was a great marker for us of what was possible in the market space. And then my wife had one of their suitcases and I was rolling it around. I'm like, this is not very good quality. And I didn't understand why there was battery chargers in it. And then we got our Monos product when we were in diligence and arrived, and you're like, wow, this thing is, you could see why all the third-party reviews were a better product. The customer reviews were a better product. We're actually cheaper now too, which is kind of wild. But you're like, the product quality is night and day. So you kind of have this market opportunity to fill a space in the premium segment with a really high quality product. And someone's already giving you a marker that customers have crazy demand for this with a not very high quality product. Imagine what you could do with a high quality product.
Yeah.
Right. And the right brand around it.
Right.
And then I think what it came down to, once you've wrapped your head around the market opportunity, it's never enough, right? The market opportunity is fine. It's table stakes to consider getting involved, but it all comes down to the people.
Right.
The founders of Monos are three of the most talented people I've ever met in my life. And it's not only pure just horsepower talent, but it's their value system and the trust you have in them to make the right decisions. And it's not only just trust them to make the right decisions, trust in them and how they make decisions and the type of opinions they try and solicit, which is why our partnership has been so strong with them. And we brought other great people around the business as well. We've recruited the former CEO of Louis Vuitton to our board.
Oh, wow.
Who's also CEO of Samsonite and Pandora. We were a guy named Marcello Bertoli. He's an incredible talent. A woman named Ashley Thompson, who runs people and culture for Decium, which is another huge success story in Canada. They sold to Estee Lauder for multiple billions.
Right.
Having people like Marcello and Ashley around the table with myself and Cam and Vic and Dan and Hubert, there's a power in that group. And we always say, more smart people around the table, the better. It's least in part, if not largely driven by my own shortcomings, which there are many. But it was really seeing the guys and their level of specific domain talent, but also their value system and how they approached other people. And then you saw that filter through the team.
Right.
If you actually look at the team of direct reports, they have guys feeding into them. And even all the way down throughout the organization, it's part of our secret sauce, a huge part of it. Last year, we were voted one of Canada's most admired cultures. We went on the first time, very hard to get. We're one of the top 50 employers in Canada. We have 100% employee NPS on the question of, would you refer Monos as a place to work for a family or friend?
Fantastic.
So all the markers of the team and talent are there for us. And then just continued execution from here on out. But I think, and we'll get into all the financial side of the business. You need great unit economics and profitability. And that was an area where not all of our competitors did really well. But, it really boils down to the people that you get to work with.
Right. Right. And I know being local to the Ossington area, or one of my homes. So the shops opened up. So what's going on with a retail strategy? Is that one of the next steps?
Yeah, I mean, it was funny. We had a lot of this conversation with folks as we were making the investment, and there was this whole craze of D2C. Everybody talking about D2C brands. And you saw the valuations that got really crazy. Like these U.S. venture firms thought they were investing in SaaS businesses. That was a waste problem, right? They raised way too much money, way too high of a valuation. It turns out at the end of the day, you're still selling fucking suitcases.
Exactly.
Excuse the language. My son's, cover yours.
Oops, Ethan. He didn't say that.
Earmuffs. And, it's like, so it kind of, there was all this poor nomenclature around it, and people got fixated on a business model being a certain way. At the end of the day, what we've always tried to do is come back to just think about the customer and, don't overcomplicate it. Right. So when you look at the market and where it's heading, luggage is actually a great category to buy online because you get a sense for the brand ethos and just, the creative and your personal fit and alignment with that as a customer by the creative we put online, our website, all the rest of it. So that's important. And then, you're kind of just thinking, well, it's a suitcase. At least it looks good.
Yeah.
Okay, great. There's all these third-party reviews. There's all these customer reviews. I think this seems like good quality, and there's enough people saying that, so you can buy it online. there's still a huge subset of the customer base that actually wants to touch and feel this thing.
Yes, exactly.
Right. And they also want a place to potentially return it if they or exchange it if they want that.
Yeah.
And so for us, we always just felt like, that's still over half of our segment is purchasing luggage in physical retail.
Right.
So for us, we're like, online's great because we're going to acquire a lot of customers. We're going to build a brand quickly.
Yeah.
But we're going to want to follow that on within our major markets, places where people can come and touch and feel the product and experience the brand in a way that they can't fully online.
Yeah.
So for us, it was always one of those things where like, the phrase we use internally was customer-centric business models.
Yeah.
It wasn't D2C.
Yeah.
It was CCB.
Yeah.
And that was kind of how we always thought about it. So we knew from our Series A investment that we would open up Vancouver for sure.
Right.
And then, but what you really want to see is the interplay of those two things. So you want to see people, you want to see your bricks and mortar location actually feeding your e-com and vice versa.
Yeah.
Which is exactly what we've seen. And I won't share the numbers because they're really good. But
competitors, it's a bad business.
Yeah, exactly. It's terrible. Close all your stores. So it's one of those ones where we just felt strongly about going and, opening up some more of those and providing customers some more of a chance to get to experience our brand and buy the product.
Yeah. Yeah. The one thing that just so stands out for me, Chris, and spending any time with you is just your passion, your commitment, your focus. Like it's super, super exciting. How do you think that impacts you, impacts the team, et cetera? How's that make a difference?
Oh man, my team probably feels like it's a bit much at times, to be honest. I'm going to send this to my team and they're going to be like, yeah, exactly. Maybe dial it back a bit. Listen, I think you've got to find your tribe. So what I've been really lucky with, I've got a great partnership, and my partner Cam, who's equally as passionate, and everyone kind of at our whole team at Venn is very passionate about what we do. And, the Monos partners are passionate. Our other founders, across the portfolio are very passionate.
Yeah.
And, I think you find people where you've got a stylistic fit, which is actually why we spend a lot of time with people before we commit meaningful dollars.
Yeah.
Because you've got to have people, again, I go back to like this grid equation, which I just love. And you need to feel comfortable that you've got people that are equally as passionate as you are. They're going to have the same kind of ability to persevere and battle through things. And they're just kind of obsessed about it. Like with the Monos guys, again, just not to pick on them. They're not the only company we've invested in. We've invested in some great brands, and we've invested in this amazing skincare brand called Formula Fig, which has locations here in Ossington and Summerhill and others. But, we're always messaging articles, things on Instagram, inspirational quotes, all of it. So I think finding people that are equally passionate as you is, at least for me, part of the formula. And that for me, it's more just about how you want to spend your life.
Yeah.
Right. And I think for me, I've always wanted to spend my life with people that are really passionate about what they're doing, because the work's not always going to be fun. Like we've had weeks that are just brutal.
Yeah.
Right. And, things don't go the way you want. And during COVID, we had businesses where container costs, were going from $3,000 to $24,000, and your contribution margin is getting crushed and the rest of it. But even in those situations, we're really lucky to have great partners. Yeah. They're really passionate, solution oriented, and they liked what they were doing.
Yeah.
And, it's not to say we always made the right decisions. We make some good ones, and some, hindsight would be 20/20, and you like to have it back. And you got to have a great degree of humility, I think, in what we do, which we're always, reminded of. It's forced on us.
Right.
But, having those people around you that are equally passionate, just a huge part of the equation.
Yeah, there's no question. And when you look at, what someone wants a career, a real successful career in venture capital, what would you be sharing with them?
God, I'm probably the worst person to give that advice, to be honest. It's our model is a little bit different. I think I'm a little bit different than most folks that are in the industry. There's a lot of great investors I know that with more traditional backgrounds I can point people in the direction of. I would just say more broadly, it's like I think the passion one is a really big thing.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's where you go to, you just don't feel like you're working.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm working nonstop. Like I've got I can't remember the last time I had a weekend off.
Yeah.
And I've got a very patient and understanding family, but it doesn't ever feel like that.
Yeah.
Like you might moments you're physically tired.
Yeah.
Because you didn't get enough sleep or
the
rest of it. But it's one of those things where you just never really feel like you're working.
Yeah.
And generally, I view, again, my lens on investing is a little bit different because I view us actually more as business builders.
Yeah, it really
and
feels
partners
like
in
that.
business building.
Yes.
And it's kind of what we're more passionate about doing. So we take very few shots on goal, and we just try and be right when we make the shots on goal and work really hard at it. And and kind of work at it that way. So it's just a little bit different, but I think, what I hope more people will do and take out of this is be in, at least in hopefully one thing I've said, probably more things you've said, will inspire people to be entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
And because if you love and you love individual agency and you love the ability to dictate your own success, it is the best and most noble thing I think people can pursue. And it's not to say there's other parts of the economy where I love,
and we need people to do all sorts of roles, etc.
Doctors, teachers, all of it. I've got family members that are run the spectrum on all those things, firefighters. It's all great. But if you have an inkling of, you think that you might like the idea of running your own business, and you didn't even prompt me for this, so I'm gonna give you the StudentWorks PSA now. But this is where StudentWorks is actually unbelievable, because it's going to give you the opportunity for the first time to do this with a little bit of your water wings and guardrails. Yeah. Right? Like you're there, you've
coaches are there.
Coaches are there.
Brands there.
Commercial insurance is there, which turns out you need sometimes if you're at least me. Workers' comp is there. I also needed that. And so that's where I think it's just what you're doing it's one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about continuing to be involved and being here and coming to trainings and the rest of it. Yeah. Because the more entrepreneurs we can put in the system in Canada, the better our country's going to be. Yeah. The more we have people that think that they're entitled to something and they don't want to do the work. And again, you don't need to be an entrepreneur, but we need to get people off of this mindset of there's a never ending gravy train in the country. Yeah. Because at some point the music's going to stop. And you saw it with, actually, not to get too political again, but if you indulge me, but like, people were looking, and I remember being lectured by Chrystia Freeland, asking what type of Canada I wanted to live in when we were talking about increasing the capital gains. Yeah. What you have to understand, and what she and most people in the government I don't think understand, is the level of stress and risk that entrepreneurs put on themselves to do what they're going to do. Yeah. So we took our salaries to 50,000 Canadian a year for the first 2 years. I was 34 years old when I started our investment firm. Yeah. And going from McKinsey partner level salary to 50 grand Canadian a year, asking my wife, who's gotten, she's the real talent in the family. And the looks, and everyone's like, how does this work? We're still unsure, but we've created a beautiful child. So, that's good. The amount of risk and stress you place on people, those people, I think like me, like you're not expecting the world and whatever. And we like being Canadian, and we like the systems exist. I love the, there's a safety net here for people to trip up and fall, because that happens sometimes. And being compassionate, I think, is a core part of being Canadian. Yeah. But, at the same time, the amount of risk you take to do it, if you're taking that level of risk and that's a life that you want to lead and that you love and that you're passionate about, there needs to be the requisite amount of reward available. And you can only tax people so far before they decide the trade-off's no longer worth it. Yeah. And then what are we left with? We're left with an increasing bill that nobody's on the hook to pay for, because the entrepreneurs and the people that are creating value, look at all the jobs that Chip Wilson's created. Yeah. Look at all the jobs that Brian Hill's created. Yeah. Look at all the jobs Danny Reese has created. Yeah. Like, that is really what's going to drive us forward. Yeah. And that's just consumer retail. You look at entrepreneurs in the natural resource sector. Exactly. There's so many Canadians that have done so much for this country. And I just think that, they're in a bit of a position of not realizing the level of respect that they deserve from our counterparts in Ottawa and, other parts of the country.
Yeah, and one of the things that I've seen from a StudentWorks perspective is we've lost so much of our talent down to the U.S. because our best people are so easily able to move. So on this podcast, we've had so many of our amazing, talented alumni and entrepreneurs being down in the US. And so it's like, so that is a concern. And again, jumping off the PSA and jumping off StudentWorks, and thank you for what you shared. The one thing I want for our leaders to point out is Chris said, and I just feel it's so true, is for Chris, working is a joy. Working, and again, it gets hard, but I'm into it. I love it. I'm killing for it. I'm killing with it with my really great friends who I love. And again, it's a I know small L love, but it is love that you care for these people, right? And again, just like I love you, you are part of our alumni program. You are part of our program. You keep coming, and it's like there's just a feeling that it is when you're really doing something that you're passionate about. And so if you don't have that, that's what we got to look at.
Yeah.
Like, you know, that's the thing. Because it's like working really, really hard isn't hard for people like you and me, isn't hard for the people come into our program and they're like just on fire with excitement. And this is what I can create in the world. And yes, I'm creating this is hard work, and that's okay because this is fun.
Yeah. I think that's it, because that's what really keeps us going during all the tough times. Right.
Yes.
And for us, we get this excitement about helping, really, again, our entrepreneurs they're the real heroes.
Yeah,
like,
of course. Yeah.
We're entrepreneurs as well, but like their job honestly is way harder than ours.
Yeah.
And I would not be good at that. With my level of passion, sometimes I'm all caps love, not small L. So it's you gotta have a small team of people that can tolerate you, which is much.
So you're good in and out then.
Yeah, exactly. But it's I just think that's such a big part of it, because we just get so excited about this concept of building these iconic Canadian brands and take them globally.
Yeah.
Like, I think a lot of people sometimes don't always know that, Lululemon's a Canadian brand. They don't know Mono's a Canadian brand.
Aritzia.
We just get the idea at Aritzia. And what I love about it is you're just creating great outcomes for consumers. So people that are taking their hard-earned dollars, which is so hard to earn money.
Yeah.
Right. And when they're spending on something, you got to have something that's really good quality and holds up. So I just love this idea. And I get it. It's not the most noble cause in the world. There's people like working in like NGOs and those types of things. And there's real challenging things happening in the world today. And our job seems kind of, minuscule and less important. But I think at the end of the day, people have bought goods and services for thousands upon thousands of years. And if we're part of that ecosystem and doing really good things for people, it brings them a little amount of joy, and that's just human nature. And I'm okay to play my small role in all of that, because it's something that excites me, is partnering with these really, really talented entrepreneurs.
Yeah. Well, it's so exciting. And I know we've bumped into a deadline for you and your family, because we've already asked so much, and Ethan's come and joined us. So thank you for joining us. And, and again, thanks for your continued support. You rock. And, again, just so crazy.
Thanks for having me, Chris. And, I'm looking forward to many more years of this with you, and I appreciate all of your support of me. And, what I did in my career and the mindset that I have wouldn't have been possible without your coaching and guidance and my experience in the program. And, we'll keep going.
You betcha.